I found the house because I was looking for somewhere dry. That winter, the roads in Vermont were half ice, half mud, and I'd been walking for 3 days with nothing in my pockets but a broken lighter and a can of beans I couldn't open. I'd been sleeping under the bridge outside Fairhaven until the police started checking there at night, shining their lights into the dark like they expected to find treasure instead of men like me. I took the railroad path north, followed it until it vanished into snow and silence, and there it was, the farmhouse, waiting like it had been holding its breath for years. It stood crooked against the trees, its roof sagging like a broken back. The windows were dark, some cracked, some missing entirely, their holes stuffed with old newspaper. The wind had worked its way through every seam of that place. You could hear it hum low through the boards, not loud, just steady, like breath. There was a barn out back too, half collapsed, its roof caved inward under the weight of last year's snow. Everything around it felt too still, the way a graveyard does before a storm. I pushed open the front door, expecting rot and mold and the sour smell of dead animals. I got all that, and something else. The air was cold, but not fresh. It had that old paper, old dust smell, like the inside of a museum that had forgotten it was supposed to close. My boots stuck to the floor where something had leaked years ago and dried. Inside, the walls were lined with faded floral wallpaper, peeling in long strips. There was a staircase to the left, its banister slick with dust, and a sitting room to the right, where a fireplace crouched full of ashes that hadn't cooled in decades. I could tell the place had been empty a long time, but not abandoned in the way most old houses were. There were no beer bottles, no graffiti, no signs of kids sneaking into smoke. It felt like everyone had just left one day, or been taken. The first thing I noticed was the sound. It wasn't quite silence, more like the absence of something that should have been there. No birds outside, no creaking timbers. Even the wind had gone cautious, whispering around the eaves instead of through them. I should have left. But hunger and exhaustion make you forget reason. I figured if I could light a small fire in the hearth, maybe find a blanket or some canned food, I'd be fine for the night. So I started to explore. There were 2 rooms on the ground floor, both stripped down to their bones. In one, a toppled chair lay beside a broken cabinet. In the other, the parlor, I guessed, the remains of a couch sagged beneath a lace throw, stiff with dust. On the wall above it, a single picture frame hung crooked, the glass fogged from the inside. When I wiped it clean, the photograph inside looked back at me. It was black and white, the kind of silvered tint that told me it was old, maybe the 1860s judging by the clothes. A family of 4 posed in front of a painted backdrop, a man with a sharp jaw and a heavy mustache seated in a wooden chair, a woman beside him in a dark gown, her face long and still, her gloved hands folded in her lap, and 2 sons standing behind them. The older boy was stiff and proper, his collar pressed to perfection. The younger, maybe 16, stood slightly apart, one hand in his pocket, the other resting against his thigh in a strange shape. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. But when I looked closer, I saw it wasn't random. His fingers were bent deliberately, index and middle forming a downward slant, the thumb curved out, the rest folded under. Together, they made a clear number, 7. The caption below read simply, "The Callahan Family, Vermont, 1860. The glass was cracked across the father's face, as if something had struck it once. A single blow, then nothing. I don't know why it unsettled me. Maybe it was the eyes. Every family portrait I've ever seen from that time has that same stiff look, people holding still for the camera, trying not to blink through the long exposure. But there was something about their stillness that felt aware. Like they weren't being photographed so much as recorded. I leaned the frame against the mantel and moved on. I found a blanket in the pantry, musty but dry enough, and spread it by the hearth. As night fell, I tried to rest, But the air in the house grew heavier the darker it got. Every sound seemed to echo through the walls. The ticking of my watch, the shifting of the boards, the slow, steady rhythm of something that almost sounded like footsteps upstairs. I told myself it was the wind. But when I turned my head toward the mantel, the photograph was no longer leaning where I'd left it. It was standing upright. I froze, staring at it through the dim light. The figures were the same. The father, the mother, the two boys. Except now, the younger son's hand wasn't just resting against his leg. It was pointed directly at me, the number 7 clear as a brand. I remember thinking maybe I'd nudged the frame somehow, that my eyes were tired. I turned over, pulled the blanket tighter, and tried to sleep. But the longer I lay there, the louder the sound in the walls became. Not mice, not the wind. A pattern, a rhythm. 7 knocks, pause, 7 more. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were full of that number. I saw it carved into doors, scratched into mirrors, written in the snow. I saw the boy from the photograph standing outside the house, staring up at the window where I slept. His hand was raised in that same gesture, his eyes hollow as coal. And behind him, just beyond the fence, I saw 7 figures standing in the dark, watching. I woke, gasping, drenched in sweat despite the cold. The fire had gone out. The house was dark, but the faintest grey light was coming through the window. Morning. I sat up, trying to steady my breathing, and that's when I saw the first carving. On the wall beside the hearth, faint but fresh, was a mark, a deep groove cut into the wood. I ran my fingers over it. It wasn't a crack. It was deliberate. The number 7. I don't know how long I sat there staring at it, trying to convince myself it had been there all along. But when I looked back at the photograph, the boy's hand was back in its original position, resting against his leg, casual, harmless. I should have left right then. Instead, I stayed. That afternoon, I went outside to look around. The property stretched down toward a half-frozen creek, the remains of an orchard on one side and a collapsed barn on the other. The air smelled faintly of iron or blood. I found an old well behind the house, its wooden cover rotted through. Inside, water glimmered faintly in the dark, and carved into the rim, almost worn away by time, was the same symbol, the number 7. Something in me broke a little then. I sat on the cold ground, head in my hands, and laughed. A hollow, ugly sound that didn't feel like mine. Because it was absurd, wasn't it? A man hiding in an abandoned house, scaring himself over numbers and photographs. But beneath the laughter was something else, something colder. Because a part of me, deep down, knew that I hadn't found that photo by accident. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I sat by the dead hearth with my flashlight, staring at the photograph. Every so often, I thought I saw the boy's eyes shift, just slightly, following me. The wind outside rose to a low, mournful wail. At some point, I must have drifted off again, because I woke to the sound of footsteps. Not above me this time. Behind me. I turned slowly. The room was empty, but on the floor near the door, something small and black lay in the dust. I picked it up. It was a photograph. Not the same one, smaller, darker, blurred. A close-up of the boy's hand, the same gesture, and written across the back in faded ink. The 7th holds the door. I dropped it like it was burning. The words echoed in my mind long after I lay back down. The 7th holds the door. I didn't sleep again that night. By dawn, I'd made up my mind to leave. But when I opened the front door, there were 7 footprints in the snow, leading up to the porch, and none leading away. I don't know what made me go back inside after seeing those footprints. The snow had already begun to fall again, soft and steady, covering their outlines one flake at a time. Maybe I told myself they were mine from the night before. Maybe I wanted to believe that. But they weren't. They were too small, too perfect, pressed into the powder as if someone had just stepped there and vanished. I stood in the doorway for a long while, staring out at the trees. The forest beyond the creek was a pale blur, skeletal branches clawing at the grey sky. Nothing moved. No birds, no wind. Just that hush that comes before something worse than a storm. My breath fogged the air, hanging there too long before it disappeared. The house creaked behind me, a slow, dragging sound, like something shifting weight from one foot to another. I turned, flashlight in hand. Nothing. Just shadows clinging to the corners like cobwebs. That's when I saw the trapdoor. It was in the hallway, half hidden beneath a rug that had disintegrated into threads. I kicked the fabric aside, and there it was, a square of dark wood, with an iron ring sunk deep into the grain. The edges were marked with scratches, old but deliberate. Not claw marks, letters. I knelt, brushing away dust until the words came clear. 7th below. My throat tightened. The same word again. 7th. The same message that had been written on the back of the photograph. I didn't want to open it. But something about that phrase, the 7th holds the door, wouldn't leave me alone. I pulled. The hinges screamed in protest, flaking rust into the air. A smell came up from below, damp and earthy, like something had been buried there and never stopped rotting. I aimed my flashlight down and saw a ladder disappearing into darkness. I told myself I'd only look for a moment, just long enough to see. The rungs groaned under my weight. The air grew colder with each step. At the bottom was a small room, maybe 6 feet square, with walls of stone and dirt packed tight. My beams swept across shelves of glass jars, each filled with cloudy liquid. Something pale floated inside one. A shape that might have been a hand or just a trick of the light. Then I saw the journal. It lay on a table in the corner, bound in cracked leather, its edges swollen from damp. The initials HC were burned into the cover. I opened it carefully. The ink had bled through the pages, but most of the writing was legible. March 3rd, 1860. Father says the sickness took another one. He believes it punishment for pride. He says the Lord asks for balance, for 7 offerings before the spring can come. I do not understand what that means. March 7th, 1860. We dug the pit beneath the floor. Father said it must be near the hearth, where warmth meets the cold. He says the 7th will hold the door shut when it opens. March 12th, 1860. Mother cries at night. My brother says the gesture is just for show, that Father does not truly mean to use it. But I have seen the chalk circle, and I know he will. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the light steady. I flipped forward through the pages, scanning half-blurred lines until one word stopped me cold. March 17th, the photograph. I read on. Father brought the camera from Boston, said it was the future, a way to fix truth into light. He told us to stand still, to hold the pose. He said the gesture must be shown so it will be remembered. I did as told. The flash burned. When the smoke cleared, I could not see my reflection in the glass. He said that was good. Said it meant I was chosen. The next page was torn out cleanly. I stood there in that cold cellar, trying to make sense of it. The boy from the photograph. He'd been writing this. And that gesture, the strange 7 with his hand. It wasn't a mistake. It was part of something. Something his father had made him do. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied. I heard a faint sound above, a creak of wood. Footsteps. I froze. Hello? My voice cracked in the stillness. Who's there? Silence. Then 7 knocks, slow, deliberate, coming from the ceiling above. I bolted up the ladder, hitting my shoulder against the frame as I came out into the hall. The air felt different, thicker, heavier. My breath came out in short clouds. I spun in a circle, scanning the walls. That's when I saw the new carvings. Everywhere. On the doors, the furniture, the beams. The number 7, over and over again. Some old, some fresh, as if scratched by invisible hands while I was below. The photo on the mantel was gone. In its place was another, smaller, darker, folded once across the middle. I picked it up with trembling fingers. The same family, but closer this time, their faces sharper, their expressions strained. The boy's hand still formed that 7, but now his mouth was open slightly, like he'd been caught mid-scream. Behind them, just visible through the window of the painted backdrop, was a shadow, the shape of a man, too tall to belong. On the back of the photo, in the same faded ink, the 7th remembers. I couldn't breathe. I backed toward the door, my flashlight beam jerking across the walls, and there, by the stairs, stood a figure. It was a boy, 16, maybe 17. Dressed in old clothes, the kind you see in museums, wool coat, high collar. His face was pale, his eyes too dark. He raised his hand, the gesture, the number 7. I ran. The front door slammed before I reached it. The whole house seemed to shudder, dust falling from the ceiling like ash. I turned and saw the boy again, closer now, his lips moving soundlessly. My flashlight went out. For a heartbeat, everything was black, and in that blackness, I saw faces, 7 of them, hovering just beyond reach, their mouths open, whispering in unison. The 7th holds the door. I don't know how I got out. I remember crashing through a window, the glass tearing my coat, my hands bleeding as I hit the snow outside. I ran until the house was just a silhouette behind me. I slept in a drainage tunnel that night, curled around the journal, like it was the only thing keeping me alive. When morning came, I checked my hands. There were 7 small cuts across my palm, thin, perfect lines that hadn't been there before. And when I unwrapped the journal to look at it again, a new entry had appeared, ink still wet. March 19th, 1860. He came. He saw. He will hold the door now. I slammed it shut. The journal never left my pack. I tried to leave it behind once, left it on a bench outside a bus station, but when I reached into my pocket for change, it was there again, the cracked leather warm against my palm as though it had been breathing. By the second night, I'd stopped trying to explain anything. I just wanted the voices to stop. They came in whispers at first, always 7 syllables, always between waking and sleep. He saw. He knows. He'll hold the door. Over and over until I started to repeat them without meaning to. By the 3rd night, I'd run out of money and ended up at a shelter in Rutland. The other men kept their distance. I must have looked like hell, mud-streaked, hollow-eyed, muttering to myself about a photograph. One of them, a retired carpenter named Dell, offered me coffee. I told him about the house, the photograph, the boy's hand. He listened quietly, then said something that stuck with me. "You ever heard of a Covenant 7? I shook my head. "Old New England thing," he said, eyes on the steam rising from his cup. "Farmers made oaths they didn't want the church hearing. 7 men, 7 marks, 7 promises to keep something buried. When one dies, another takes his place. Otherwise, whatever they bound gets loose again." He looked at me then, and I realized his fingers were trembling. "You said you found a trap door?" "Yeah. Then you're already part of it." That night, I dreamed of the Callahan boy again. He stood at the edge of the pit beneath the house, holding that same gesture against his chest. Behind him, the dark moved, slow, alive, like oil catching fire without light. When he looked up, his eyes were mine. The next morning I stole a flashlight and a can of gasoline from the maintenance shed and hitched a ride north. I told myself I'd burn the place, end whatever it was. If the journal wanted to follow me, let it burn too. I reached the old road by dusk. The farmhouse looked smaller in daylight, almost harmless. Snow had melted into grey puddles, and the air smelled of wet bark. I forced the door open with my shoulder and stepped inside. The house was waiting. Everything was cleaner than before. The dust, the webs, gone. The walls gleamed with damp, and the air pulsed faintly, like breath through a throat too narrow. On the mantel, the photograph had returned. The family's faces were clearer now, but the boy was gone. Only 6 figures remained. I took out the journal, flipped to the last page, and saw new writing scratched across the paper. March 20th, 1860. The 7th stands apart until called. When the door opens, he must take the place of the missing one. My flashlight flickered. The beam crawled over the hearth and froze. The trapdoor was open. A faint light glowed below. Pale, steady, the color of old bone. I climbed down. The jars were gone. The air was warm, almost metallic. At the far end of the chamber stood a wooden chair carved with 7 tally marks. On the seat lay the missing photograph, larger now, printed on thick glass like a daguerreotype. The boy had reappeared. His hand, the 7, pointed not upward but outward, toward me. I took a step back. The walls began to hum. Dust rose from the floor in spirals, forming shapes that almost looked like faces. Then a voice, faint but familiar, filled the room. Eli Mercer. Hearing my own name down there was like being dropped into freezing water. "Who's there?" "You are." The light dimmed, then flared, illuminating the boy standing behind the chair. He was transparent now, skin stretched thin over light instead of bone. He looked at me with hollow calm. "They sealed him," he said. "7 of us. Father said it was mercy, each one marked to hold the door shut." "Who?" "The thing that came through." His mouth twisted. It liked to wear faces. The humming grew louder. I felt it through my ribs, through the cuts in my palm. The walls shivered as if something enormous pressed against them from outside. "He's waking," the boy whispered. "One of us is gone. The seal needs 7. I stepped backward. "No, not me." His head tilted. "You found the sign. You opened the pit. You read the name." "What name?" He raised his hand. 7 fingers extended, where there should have been 5, 2 more split from flesh like new branches. "His name," he said, and smiled. The floor buckled. My flashlight shattered. The dark that poured from beneath the chair wasn't shadow. It was matter, dense and cold, crawling across the ground like smoke that had learned to think. When it touched my boot, it felt alive. I ran for the ladder, but every rung I grabbed turned slick, rotten, pulling free from the wall. Something whispered just behind my ear, a child's voice, patient, coaxing. "Hold the door, Eli." I clawed my way up, lungs burning, and burst into the hall. The light through the windows had turned red, the color of rust and sunset mixed. I stumbled toward the front door, but the boy was standing there, blocking the way. Only it wasn't the boy anymore. The body still wore his clothes, but the face, God, the face was stretched into something inhuman, its mouth fixed in the same curve as the 7, split wide to the ear. "7th, it rasped. "Stay." I swung the gasoline can and struck it across the head. It reeled, screaming without sound. I splashed fuel across the walls, across the floorboards, and lit the match. Flame bloomed fast. The heat hit like a punch, driving me backward into the snow outside. Through the smoke, I saw them. 7 shapes at the windows, their mouths open in unison, the fire reflected in their hollow eyes. Then the roof collapsed. I walked for 2 days before anyone found me. A farmer driving into Brattleboro saw the smoke and picked me up on the roadside. He asked what happened. I said nothing. I couldn't. The cuts in my hand had healed into thin scars that formed a perfect 7. The police went out to the site a week later. No remains, no structure, just scorched earth and one item found in the ashes, a photograph printed on glass, edges melted smooth. It showed 6 figures standing before a house that no longer existed. When they gave it to the State Museum, the curator called me. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "are you certain there were 7 people in this picture? Because we can only see 6. I told her to destroy it. She laughed softly. "We don't destroy artifacts." "That was 3 months ago. I live in a shelter near Concord now. I sweep floors at night, sleep during the day. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see them, the Callahans, standing in their photograph, waiting. The boy always at the edge, his hand raised in that terrible gesture, reminding me what comes next. A week ago, a package arrived at the shelter with no return address. Inside was a photograph, wrapped in brown paper. I didn't have to open it to know. I burned it in the alley, but the smoke rose straight up instead of drifting, as if something inside refused to scatter. Last night, I woke to knocking. 7 times. Slow and even. This morning, there was frost on the inside of my window, 7 lines, drawn by something that wanted me to see. The journal is gone now. The scars on my hand itch when I sleep. Sometimes, in that half-world between dreaming and waking, I hear a voice whispering from beneath the floorboards of memory. He came. He saw. He will hold the door now, and I understand what it means. The seal never dies. It only waits for someone desperate enough to open the house again. Someone like me. If you ever find a photograph of a family from 1860, father stern, mother pale, boy on the left with one hand in his pocket, fingers bent into a number 7, don't touch it. Don't look too long. And for God's sake, don't count how many shadows are in the frame. Because there are only supposed to be 6, but the 7th always finds you.